in a crowded Marine Corps mess hall, a confident USMC captain cracked a harmless joke at the quiet janitor sweeping in the corner, asking him what his old call sign used to be. She expected a laugh. She expected a timid answer. What she didn't expect was the name Sticky Six. And in that instant, the entire room fell silent. Because legends don't announce themselves, sometimes they mop floors so they can sleep at night. What happened next would change every life in that room and reveal a truth the military had buried in the dark. Before we begin, if you love heartfelt stories about kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes among us, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Stories that heal, uplift, and remind us of the goodness in people. The first light of morning slipped across Marine Corps Air Station Miramar like a quiet promise, soft, golden, and almost apologetic. It filtered through the rows of hangars across the training fields and finally into the far corner of the base, where the older structure stood. There, tucked between a storage bay and an aging mess hall, a side door creaked open. Brandon Cross stepped out, one hand holding a worn mop handle, the other steadying a plastic bucket that had seen better decades. His boots were clean, but old. His uniform simple and unranked, the kind given to civilian maintenance staff. The faint scent of disinfectant clung to him, mixed with something gentler cedar shampoo, the one his daughter insisted he use because it smells like safety. His long hair tied loosely at the back shimmered chestnut under the rising sun. He didn't look like a janitor. He didn't even look like a man who belonged to the shadows he so carefully walked in. But he moved with the quiet determination of someone who'd spent years trying to not be seen. Inside the mess hall, the air was still. Brandon dipped the mop into the bucket and started rhythmically smoothing long strokes across the tiled floor. He worked with an almost meditative focus, steady, purposeful. The world could be loud, dangerous, unpredictable. But this was predictable, understandable, safe. And safe was all he wanted, for himself, for the little girl still asleep across town. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound of the mop soothe the restlessness inside him. But the peace was interrupted by a soft buzz in his pocket. He dried his hand and pulled out a cheap flip phone, the kind military families used back when deployments were long and Wi-Fi unreliable. A photo filled the tiny screen Chloe with a missing front tooth, holding up a lopsided pancake she had made herself. Another message followed. "Daddy, I made breakfast. I saved you one. Saved you. But you have to eat it warm, or it gets sad." Brandon couldn't help the smile tugging at his lips, the kind of smile that softened the lines of a man who had seen too much. He typed back slowly, carefully, his fingers still not entirely steady on mornings like this. "I'll hurry. Tell the pancake I'm on my way." He pocketed the phone and resumed his work. The floor gleamed behind him, the faint reflection of a man who'd surrendered medal's rank, and a call sign no one dared to speak aloud. But the past had its own scent, like smoke rising from a fire long extinguished. No matter how softly he tried to live, it followed him. "Brandon," he startled slightly. Not outwardly, he never reacted outwardly, but the mop paused mid-sweep. Master Gunnery Sergeant Bruce Cole, nearing 60, but still sharp as a saber, stepped into the hall. His weathered face was kind, but his eyes were steel, always scanning, always noticing. "You're in early," Cole said gruffly, though not unkindly. Brandon nodded. "Floor gets sticky after chow rush. Easier to handle before the Marines stampede through." Cole smirked. "They don't stampede. They move with purpose." Brandon raised an eyebrow. Cole exhaled. "Fine. They stampede." For a moment, just a moment, the two men stood comfortably in each other's silence. Cole had never asked too many questions. He just watched Brandon the way old warhorses watch the sky, knowing storms by instinct. "Your girl doing okay?" Cole asked gently. "Chloe's good. First-grade drama, you know." Brandon's voice warmed. "She wants me to come to her class. Career day." Oh, Cole leaned forward with an amused grin. "And what are you presenting? The mysteries of the industrial mop. The noble art of custodial strategy." Brandon shrugged. "She wants me to talk about bravery." Cole's grin faded. His eyes shifted subtle, but Brandon noticed. "You'll figure out the right words," Cole murmured quietly. "You always do," "Thanks," Brandon said, though the compliment felt heavier than the mop in his hand. Cole gave him a nod before heading off. When the door swung shut behind him, Brandon exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. He finished the last stretch of the floor, wrung out the mop, and stored everything neatly in the closet. He always put things back perfectly, angles, precise tools aligned. Order was one of the only things the military had given him that he still found comfort in. After locking up, he stepped outside and blinked at the brightness. The base was coming alive now. Marines jogging in formation, engines roaring on the runway, radios buzzing with morning briefings. The world around him was loud, filled with purpose and power, and he walked through it like a ghost. By the time he reached the parking lot, his steps slowed. He leaned against the old truck he had bought for a few $100s and let the cool metal steady him. His breathing stilled, his eyes softened, and for the first time that morning, he let himself feel the quiet ache that lived deep beneath his ribs. Not pain, exactly, just the weight of all the things he'd chosen to lay down. Rank, honor, identity. The call sign whispered only in rooms without windows. He closed his eyes and whispered a name that never fully left him. Sticky 6. A call sign that carried too many nights, too much fire, and the faces of men he could not save. He rubbed a hand across his tired eyes. Footsteps approached, light, small, familiar. Brandon turned as Chloe ran toward him from the daycare building, hair-bouncing backpack shaped like a purple dinosaur flapping behind her. She jumped straight into his arms. "Daddy, you're here." He caught her easily, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Her little hands cupped his face, her eyes searching him the way only children can, honest, unguarded, loving without question. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "Now I am." Chloe giggled and pressed her nose to his, and something inside Brandon, something worn and scarred, melted just a little. He set her down gently and took her hand. "Ready to go home and save that pancake before it gets sad," she gasped dramatically. "We have to hurry." Brandon opened the truck door for her, and as she climbed in, he allowed himself one last glance back at the base. The world of rank challenge and unspoken legends. A world he thought he had left behind forever. He didn't know yet that by sundown tomorrow, a single joke in a crowded mess hall would drag that world straight back to him. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would be quiet again. The noon rush at the Miramar mess hall sounded like organized chaos. Metal trays clattering, boots thudding, Marines laughing too loudly at jokes that wouldn't be funny anywhere else. The scent of grilled chicken and powdered mashed potatoes drifted through the air with all the subtlety of an artillery round. Captain Megan Drake strode into the room with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned her presence. Tall, athletic, dark auburn hair tucked neatly beneath her cover, she moved with the precision and purpose that young Marines admired and older Marines pretended not to notice. Megan was respected, sharp, direct. Her reputation, intense but fair, followed her like the rhythmic click of her polished boots. But today her mood was lighter than usual. She'd returned from a morning training inspection where everything ran perfectly. That always put her in high spirits. Her fellow lieutenants and captains gathered around her as she entered, some still chuckling about a misheard call sign from earlier that morning. "Hey, Captain Lieutenant Ramos," called, smirking, still thinking about that pilot who called himself Turtle 10, the slowest call sign in Corps history. Megan rolled her eyes. If you pick your own call sign and you pick Turtle, you're either a genius or an idiot. I haven't decided which. You would never pick something that stupid, another officer teased. "No," Megan said with mock pride. "My call sign would be Victory. Or maybe Iron Lady. Something with finesse." The group broke into laughter as they moved toward the food counter. Megan grabbed a tray, scanning the room with casual curiosity, and that's when she froze. At the far table, sitting alone with the humble posture of someone trying not to exist, was the janitor she'd seen around the base. Brandon Cross. Long hair, quiet eyes, movements always careful, almost rehearsed. She'd never paid much attention to him before. Most didn't. But today, something about him, a flicker of heaviness in his shoulders, caught her eye. Her friends noticed her staring. "What's got you so serious all of a sudden?" Ramos asked. Megan blinked, then shrugged. "Nothing. Just wondering how a guy like that ended up working here." "Probably a washout," Corporal Sims muttered. "We get lots of those. Or someone who never had what it takes," Ramos added. Megan didn't correct them. She didn't really care enough to. But a sliver of curiosity remained. Something about Brandon didn't match the caricature they were drawing. As she and her group passed by Brandon's table, she slowed just enough to look at him. He lifted his eyes for a split second. There was something there, something quietly devastating. Something old. But before she could place it, she heard Sims whisper behind her. Bet he had the weakest call sign ever. Megan's competitive nature kicked in. She stopped, turned, and with a teasing tone, light careless, she asked, "Hey, Janitor, what was your call sign?" Something like, "Dust Mop 1." Her friend snickered behind her. Brandon didn't react the way she expected. No embarrassment. No irritation. He just stared at her for a moment, as though weighing how much energy honesty would cost him. He didn't answer. Megan raised an eyebrow, emboldened by the audience behind her. "Come on, don't be shy. Everyone who served had one. Still nothing." Ramos chimed in. Maybe his call sign was "Run Away." More laughter. Brandon simply pushed a piece of food across his tray, with a quiet patience that suddenly irritated Megan. Not because he looked weak, but because he didn't defend himself at all. It made her feel like she was punching fog. "You did serve, didn't you?" Megan asked, tone a mix of curiosity and challenge. Brandon's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in restraint. "Yes," he said, finally quietly. "Well then," she pressed with a grin, "what did they call you?" Her group leaned closer, ready for the joke, ready to laugh, ready to confirm what they already believed. Before Brandon could respond, a familiar voice boomed from behind them. "What's going on here?" Master Gunnery Sergeant Bruce Cole approached, his expression unreadable. The older Marine scanned the faces, Megan, Ramos, the others, then his gaze landed on Brandon. Brandon nodded respectfully, but with the distance of a man who had learned to keep his soul hidden. "Just talking," Megan said casually, trying to guess what our friend here's call sign was. Cole's expression stiffened barely but noticeably. Megan didn't catch it, but Brandon did. Cole approached the table slowly. "Why do you care about his call sign?" Captain Megan shrugged, just trying to lighten the mood. "He's always so serious." "He has earned the right to be serious," Cole replied, voice low. The officers exchanged confused glances. Ramos whispered, "What's that supposed to mean?" Cole didn't answer him. Instead, the older Marine's eyes moved sharp as a hawk to Brandon's uniform shirt. And then the moment changed. Because as Brandon shifted slightly, the edge of a hidden patch peeked out from under the fold of his shirt. A patch old enough that its colors had almost bled into each other. But the symbol, faint partial, was still unmistakable. A black dagger, a faded gold ring around it, a marking that should not have existed here, or anywhere publicly. Bruce Cole's blood ran cold. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly. "That patch," he whispered, voice trembling ever so slightly. Brandon froze. Megan looked confused. "Patch? What patch?" Cole stepped forward, eyes locked on Brandon's half-hidden insignia. "Captain Drake. That's not just any patch." "What is it?" she asked, brows knitting. Cole's eyes didn't leave Brandon. "It belongs to a unit that technically doesn't exist." Ramos snorted. "Oh, come on." Cole cut him off with a tone that silenced even the noisiest Marines. "I'm not joking." Megan turned back to Brandon, studying him with new eyes. The easy humor faded from her face. Her pulse quickened. "What was your call sign?" she asked again, but this time not teasing. This time, cautious. Brandon lowered his fork. He didn't look at her, didn't look at Cole. He simply breathed in, slow, exhausted, like he'd been running from this moment for years. And then, in the softest, calmest voice imaginable, he answered, "You don't want to know." But Megan did. She felt it in her chest, a shift, a gravity she couldn't identify. "Tell me," she whispered. Brandon looked up, into her eyes, and for a single heartbeat everything stilled. He parted his lips to speak. The room around him kept buzzing. But his world, and hers, had already started to tilt. The mess hall noise faded into a strange, muffled hum, like someone had closed a door between reality and the people standing at Brandon's table. What moments ago had been laughter and harmless teasing now felt charged, dense, as if the air itself was bracing for something it wasn't prepared to hear. Master Gunnery Sergeant Bruce Cole's eyes stayed locked on the small sliver of fabric near Brandon's side. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. It was just a patch barely the size of a thumbprint. Most of it was hidden beneath the fold of Brandon's shirt, but the edge revealed enough. A dagger. A ring of faded gold. Ghosted embroidery that only a handful of Marines would ever recognize. Captain Megan Drake watched the older Marine's reaction with growing unease. She'd never seen Cole rattled. The man had served in 2 wars, had a chest full of ribbons, and had once stared down a wild coyote behind the barracks without flinching. But now, he looked scared. Gunny Megan said cautiously, "You're pale. Sit down if you need." "I'm fine," he snapped too quickly. Then softer, almost reverent. "I just never thought I'd see that patch again. Not in my lifetime." Her brows drew together. "What patch? What does it even mean?" Cole swallowed like a man trying to dislodge ghosts from his throat. He stepped closer to Brandon, not in threat, but in awe and disbelief. "Cross," he said quietly, "it can't be you. That patch, you shouldn't have it. No one should." The young Marines around them exchanged confused glances. Ramos rolled his eyes. "Gunny, are we doing the whole spooky legend thing again? Because last time it was just a night ops training group." Cole turned sharply. "Lieutenant, shut your mouth." Silence slammed down over the table. Megan felt tension coil in her spine. No one silenced Ramos unless lives were at stake or stupidity had reached catastrophic levels. She looked back at Brandon. He hadn't moved. His fingers rested lightly on his fork, eyes lowered. But beneath that stillness was something else, something heavy, resigned, like a man listening to the inevitable rumble of an approaching storm. Cross Cole said again, voice trembling, "Tell me that patch is from a thrift store. Tell me it's a fake." Brandon didn't answer. Cole's hand shook as he reached out, but stopped a few inches short, as though touching the fabric might bring back memories he'd buried decades ago. That patch, Cole whispered, belongs to JSO. Megan blinked. JSO, I've never heard of it. You weren't supposed to. Cole wiped his palms on his uniform. It wasn't in manuals. It wasn't on rosters. It wasn't in classified files. And if anyone ever asked about it, the answer was simple. JSO didn't exist. The Marines around them fell eerily still. What did it stand for? Someone murmured. Cole exhaled shakily. Joint Special Operations. But not the branch you're thinking of. This was different. A ghost unit. The kind only called when the mission was impossible or unspeakable. Most of us thought it was just a story passed around to scare new recruits. Megan stared at Brandon with a new, unsettling awareness. And you're saying he was part of it? Cole didn't answer immediately. His gaze traveled slowly up to meet Brandon's eyes. I'm saying, the men who wore that patch never walked into a mess hall unnoticed. They never faded into the background. They were legends, myths, shadows with dog tags. The room seemed to shrink around them. Finally, Brandon looked up. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Gunny, please don't. But Cole wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing, piecing fragments of stories he'd heard years ago, the kind whispered in barracks long after lights out. A transport helicopter that landed despite losing hydraulics. A mountain extraction where one pilot stayed behind so the others could make it home. A man with the call sign Sticky 6 who flew missions no human should have survived. Megan sensed the shift, the way Cole stiffened, the way Brandon finally straightened in his seat, not defensively, but with the calm of someone who had tried to hide and failed. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her chest. Brandon, she said slowly, is this true? Were you part of that group? He looked at her with eyes that carried years. Years of silence, of loss of guilt, of choosing a small life over the weight of a heroic one. I was just a pilot, he murmured. Cole laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound. Yeah, and the ocean is just a puddle. Megan pressed, voice shaking slightly. So what was your call sign? Brandon closed his eyes, regretting everything about this moment. Her joke, the patch, the past he'd tried so desperately to bury. It doesn't matter anymore. It does to me, Megan said too softly for her own comfort. It surprised her, the sincerity in her voice. She hated that it surprised her. Cole said firmly, tell her. The noise in the room, the trays clattering, Marines talking, boots pounding seemed to recede. A tunnel of silence formed around their table. People turned, sensing something happening, something strange, important. Brandon straightened slowly, not proudly, not defiantly, but with the exhausted acceptance of someone who had carried truth like a wound that never closed. His voice was almost a whisper. Sticky 6. The name floated into the air like a dropped match, tiny, quiet, harmless at first glance, but the reaction was instant. A fork clattered to the floor. Someone gasped. Another Marine whispered, no way. That's impossible. Megan's breath caught in her throat. Sticky 6. You. Cole's voice was a rasp. Major Cross. The Sticky 6. Brandon flinched at the rank, at the name he'd abandoned, at the world that suddenly remembered him. He didn't look heroic. He didn't look proud. He looked like a man watching the last peaceful moment of his life slip away. Megan stared at him, not with the amusement she had walked in with, but with something else. Something she couldn't yet name. Something that frightened her more than anything. Because if this quiet janitor, this gentle father, this solitary man, was truly Sticky 6, then she had just mocked a legend. And nothing about the world she thought she understood was the same anymore. For one suspended heartbeat, time inside the Miramar mess hall became a single fragile thread, thin enough to snap, thick enough to hold the weight of disbelief. The name had been spoken. Sticky 6, a call sign rarely uttered, never joked about, often whispered as a rumor never confirmed as real. Now it sat between them, between Brandon Cross and Captain Megan Drake, like a flare dropped at their feet, flooding the room with a stark, blinding truth. The laughter that had filled the hall seconds ago evaporated into a quiet so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. Even the industrial ceiling fans seemed to hesitate, their dull hum fading beneath the stunned silence. A fork clinked against the tiles again. Someone had kicked it by accident this time, but no one looked down. All eyes were on Brandon. Bruce Cole swallowed hard enough for Megan to hear it. His weathered face had gone pale, the lines around his eyes deepening with something like reverence and fear. Sticky 6, Cole said again, softer now, almost a confession. Brandon didn't lift his gaze. He simply let the words settle. Let the reactions rumble around him. Let the world reorient itself around a truth he had kept hidden for years. He had never wanted this moment. He had done everything a man could do to avoid it. But the past had a long reach and a patient grip. Megan stood frozen, her breath caught somewhere between her sternum and her throat. She'd walked into the room joking about call signs, about military bravado, about pilots who tried too hard to sound impressive. Never, never in all her sharp, clever, capable years had she imagined she would stumble into this. She whispered the name again, unable to stop herself. Sticky 6. That was... Brandon finally looked at her. His eyes were steady, quiet, tired, like a man who had spent too many years outrunning memories that still found him. That was a long time ago, he said softly. But you were... She struggled to find the words. That pilot. The one from the mountain rescue. The one who Captain Cole cut in, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You don't know half the things this man's done. And I prayed you never have to. Megan felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, but a kind of shame she had never experienced before. Shame for mocking him. Shame for assuming. Shame for walking through life so certain she could read people. And being so profoundly wrong. Ramos stood behind her, his voice cracking. Sir, is this really him? The Sticky 6, Cole exhaled his gaze, rooted in the patch now fully visible after Brandon's slight shift. There are stories told in units that don't appear in any file, Cole said, not taking his eyes off Brandon. Stories about a pilot who kept a crippled bird in the sky for almost an hour after the fuel line ruptured. Stories about a man who flew low enough and long enough to draw enemy fire away from ground teams pinned in a canyon. He paused. Stories about a major who refused evacuation until every last Marine was lifted out. Whispers rippled through the room like a quiet storm. That was him. Impossible. No pilot survives a sticky leak. Sticky. Oh God, that's why sticky fuel. Sticky 6! Megan's pulse hammered against her ribs. She felt the weight of her earlier joke press into her skin like cold iron. She cleared her throat, voice unsteady. Brandon. Why didn't you tell anyone? He gave her a small, sad smile. Because I didn't want to be Sticky 6 anymore. The simplicity of it cut through her more sharply than any explanation. Then why are you here? She whispered. Why a janitor? Why this base? Brandon hesitated a long, thoughtful pause. Because Chloe likes the school district, he answered, eyes softening at the thought of his daughter. And because cleaning floors is peaceful. It was the last answer anyone expected, and exactly the one that fit him. Before Megan could speak again, the mess hall doors swung open with force. Colonel Carter Mills strode in. A hush fell even deeper, if that were possible. Mills wasn't just a commanding officer. He was a force of nature in human form. A man who carried authority not by rank alone, but by the weight of decisions he had survived. Gunny Cole Mills said, voice a low rumble, "You called for me." Cole stepped aside, giving him a clear line of sight. Mills's eyes landed on Brandon. Everything in the colonel's posture changed. Gone was the brisk, clipped energy of a commanding officer dealing with daily logistics. In its place was something older, heavier recognition. Major Cross Mills said quietly. The room collectively inhaled. Brandon flinched at the rank at the name he'd shed like a burned-out shell of his former self. "Colonel?" he murmured, barely audible. The colonel stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance away, as though approaching a man who carried both glory and grief in equal measure. "I thought you were dead," Mills said softly. Brandon met his eyes. "Sometimes I thought the same." Mills nodded, once the kind of nod men exchange when they've seen the same battlefield even from different angles. Then he turned to Megan. "Captain Drake Mills," said, his tone sharper now, though not unkind. "Were you aware of who you were speaking to?" Megan's throat tightened. "No, sir." "Do you understand now?" She swallowed. "I think so, sir." Mills's stern demeanor eased just a fraction. He wasn't here to reprimand her. He was here because someone had summoned an old ghost from the shadows. "Major Cross is not to be disrespected," Mills said, clearly projecting his voice across the room. "He served this country in ways most will never understand. If he chooses a quiet life here, we honor that." He turned back to Brandon, lowering his voice. "And we protect it." Brandon nodded once, grateful but conflicted. Cole placed a hand over his heart in a gesture more emotional than formal. "Sir, it's an honor." Mills exhaled. "No, Gunny. The honor was ours. Years ago." Megan stood rooted to the floor, every assumption she had ever made about Brandon dissolving into nothing. She opened her mouth, uncertain what words would come. "Brandon, I didn't know. I shouldn't have." He lifted a hand gently. "It's all right," he said softly with a grace that disarmed her completely. You didn't know, but Megan felt the sting of it anyway. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. It was easier to offend someone with a temper, harder to forgive yourself when the one you hurt forgave you first. The hall slowly returned to motion. Boots, moving trays, clattering whispers, buzzing in every corner. But the atmosphere was forever changed. Brandon stood gathering his things, not hurriedly, just quietly. He didn't need to make an exit. The room parted for him on instinct respect, rising like a tide. Megan watched him go, her heartbeat tangled with confusion, and something deeper, something unfamiliar, something that felt suspiciously like awe. And as the door closed behind him, Captain Megan Drake understood one thing. Nothing about her life at Miramar would ever be the same again. Colonel Carter Mills had walked into countless rooms in his career. War rooms, command centers, barracks full of restless Marines, even makeshift shelters in hostile deserts. But nothing had ever caused the peculiar jolt in his chest, quite like the sight before him now. A janitor's uniform, a familiar sliver of a forbidden patch, and a name he hadn't spoken aloud for years. Major Brandon Cross, the legend who had vanished from all rosters, all reports, all unofficial channels. Dead to some, missing to others. Lost Mills had believed to the silence that swallowed broken heroes, and now he was standing here, holding a cafeteria tray. Major Cross, the colonel, repeated voice, steady, but tinged with disbelief. Brandon lifted his gaze with quiet resignation. He gave a soft nod, the kind that acknowledged both respect and discomfort. "Sir." The single word was enough to send a second ripple through the room. Marines who had stiffened earlier now looked frozen entirely, as though a piece of history had materialized in front of them. But Brandon's shoulders curved ever so slightly inward, as if absorbing attention rather than deflecting it. He looked smaller in his janitor's uniform, but there was something in his posture and his eyes that told a different story. a story Mills had never forgotten. Captain Megan Drake stood rigid heat prickling at the back of her neck. She felt like a child caught misbehaving in front of a revered elder. The earlier humor she'd walked in with felt like a distant memory, reckless, naive. She managed to straighten. "Sir," she murmured, her voice subdued. Mills didn't look at her at first. His attention stayed locked on Brandon with the kind of intensity only reserved for men forged in fire. Gunny Cole Mills said, without breaking eye contact, "How long have you known Cole stiffened?" "Just saw the patch today, sir. I didn't want to assume." Mills nodded once. "You were right not to." Then finally he turned toward the young captain. "Captain Drake." Megan swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Did you know who you were speaking to?" "No, sir." She forced her voice not to tremble. "But I should have been more respectful." Mills studied her a beat longer than was comfortable. But when he spoke, his tone wasn't reprimand. It was instruction. "Respect is earned, Captain. And Major Cross earned more than most Marines ever will." He paused. "But you didn't know. Now you do." The word struck deeply. Not as a scolding, but as a weight. She suddenly wanted to carry right. Brandon cleared his throat softly. "Colonel, please, don't make a scene. I'm just a janitor here, that's all." Megan watched Mills's jaw tighten. Some emotion, anger, grief flickered briefly behind his eyes. "You were never just anything Mills said." His voice was steady, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. It wasn't anger. It was something more personal, something heavier. Brandon looked away, uncomfortable under the spotlight Mills had unintentionally cast on him. The silence stretched thin between them. Finally, Mills drew in a slow breath. "Major, why didn't you tell anyone you were here?" Brandon's hands closed around the tray he still held, knuckles whitening just slightly. "I didn't want to be found, sir." Mills pressed a hand to his hip, a gesture he used when he was thinking through difficult truths. "We thought you were dead," he said quietly. "There were no reports, no trace." "Command assumed I know," Brandon replied gently. "And I'm sorry for that." Mills stepped closer. Not imposing, just present, grounded. The way men who had carried burdens recognized others who carried equal ones. "You saved 23 lives that night," Mills murmured. "You held a dying aircraft together with skill and stubborn will. You lost half your blood. You were the last one out." His voice thickened. "We buried empty caskets for some of the men we couldn't bring home. And you never came back." A muscle in Brandon's jaw twitched just once. Megan felt something twist in her chest. She couldn't look away from him. The quiet janitor she'd mocked hours ago was now standing beneath the weight of decades of impossible missions and unhealed wounds. "I couldn't serve anymore," Brandon said softly. "Not after everything. There was no disgrace in what happened," Mills said. "You know that." "It wasn't about disgrace," Brandon replied. "I needed quiet." That word quiet hung between them like a fragile truce. From the corner of the room, the lunch line resumed in small, hesitant spurts. Conversation crept back in whispers, not wanting to disturb the gravity of the moment, but desperate to fill the air again. Mills finally nodded. Slow, accepting, but not without sorrow. "All right. If quiet is what you need, then we honor it." Brandon let out a breath, relief edged with guilt. "But understand this," Mills continued. "Your service, your sacrifice will never be erased by a mop or a bucket. You chose a peaceful life, and that's your right. But don't ever think that makes you any less than the man you were." Brandon lowered his gaze. "Yes, sir." Then Mills turned toward Megan. "Captain, I trust you'll treat Major Cross with the respect he deserves." Megan stood straighter. "Yes, sir. I already regret my words." Mills held her gaze a moment longer. "Good. Regret can be a teacher if you let it," Brandon interjected gently. She didn't mean harm, Colonel. It was a joke. No harm done. His kindness struck Megan harder than any reprimand. How could he forgive so easily? How could a man carry so much history and still speak with such gentleness? Mills sighed, always defending others. Some things never change. The tension eased slightly. Cole gave a quiet chuckle, a sound filled with relief and nostalgia. You know, Cole murmured, shaking his head, I used to think Sticky Six was a myth, a story Marines told after too many beers. But here he is, cleaning up our messes. Literally. Brandon managed a small smile. Someone's got to do it. Mills clapped a hand on his shoulder, firm, respectful. If you ever need anything, Major, anything at all, my door's open. I know, Sir, Brandon said softly. Thank you. Then Mills turned toward the doorway. Gunny Captain, carry on. The colonel exited with a command presence that returned the room to its usual rhythm, but nothing felt the same. Megan stood frozen long after he left. Brandon set down his tray and began to gather the cleaning supplies he'd brought earlier, his demeanor calm, as if nothing exceptional had happened. Captain, he said, meeting her gaze with quiet courtesy. If you'll excuse me. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because nothing she could say felt large enough to contain the apology forming in her chest. As Brandon walked out of the mess hall, Megan Drake realized something with startling clarity. Respect wasn't something given by rank medals or fear. It was earned by the way a man lived and the way he carried the things that could have broken him. And Brandon Cross carried his past with a silence more powerful than any uniform. Night in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan did not fall gently, it collapsed. Like a curtain of ink dropped from a great height, swallowing every ridge line, every ravine, every trembling breath of wind. The cold arrived with it, sharp and immediate, slicing through the thin flight suit Major Brandon Cross wore beneath his gear. Colonel Carter Mills' narration echoed in the present, but his memory swept the readers and Marines alike, back into that brutal night, the night Sticky Six was born. Visibility's dropping fast. The voice of the co-pilot cracked through the headset, almost drowned by the violent rattle of the UH-60. Black Hawk being tossed around by mountain winds. Brandon gripped the cyclic jaw clenched. Stay with me. The helicopter struggled like a wounded animal, blades cutting the air unevenly, as snow and dust churned into a suffocating blur. The extraction team below 15 Marines, pinned behind a boulder field, were still 3 minutes out. 3 minutes too long. The enemy had night optics. Brandon knew the next volley of fire could cut through the bird like paper. Cross-fuel leak. The crew chief's shout punched through the cockpit. Brandon glanced at the gauge, and his stomach dropped. The fuel pressure was plummeting fast, like air escaping a balloon. How bad, Brandon barked. Sticky, sir. Sticky fuel, thick as tar. It's clogging the line. Brandon closed his eyes for half a second. Sticky fuel. The phrase alone struck terror into the heart of every pilot who'd ever heard it. Fuel contaminated with dust and debris became gelatinous sticky, making it nearly impossible for the engine to maintain consistent thrust. Most helicopters lasted 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and they were still miles from the extraction point. Brandon steadied the trembling bird. We're not leaving them. Sir, we won't make it, the co-pilot protested. Brandon's voice dropped to a cold, steady command. Then we fly until the engines fall out of the sky. In the present, the mess hall had grown still as Colonel Mills recounted the memory, aloud to a small circle of Marines, Megan among them. Only Brandon wasn't present to hear it. He had slipped away quietly, as he always did. But Mills's story filled the space he left behind. Sticky Six wasn't a call sign he chose. Mills said voice rough. It was the name everyone whispered afterward. The man who flew a sticky fuel helicopter longer than physics allowed. Megan listened, leaning forward slightly. There was no bravado in Mills's storytelling. This wasn't a campfire tale. It was an eyewitness account of insanity, brilliance, and bravery fused into one unforgettable night. "Sir," she asked softly, "how did he even keep the bird in the air?" Mills exhaled, sheer will and training, and maybe something more. Back in the flashback, the engines coughed. Loud, violent coughing like a dying animal. Sir EGT's spiking, she's overheating. Brandon tapped Gage's instincts and muscle memory, aligning. Divert power, keep the tail rotor alive. We lose that, we spin out. Rounds ripped through the air outside tracers, lighting the darkness like red-hot fireflies. The gunner opened up, returning fire in desperate bursts. Marines are signaling, the crew chief yelled. They're pinned northwest ridge. Through the storm of dust, Brandon spotted flashes of muzzle fire. "Hold her steady," he commanded. The helicopter dipped so low the skids nearly scraped the rocks. The co-pilot swore under his breath, clutching the console as Brandon forced the helicopter into a controlled hover no sane pilot would attempt in those conditions. "Let's move," Brandon shouted. Marines scrambled toward the bird under the thin protection of rotor wash. The first few were hauled inside by the crew chief, then the next. Gunfire intensified, enemy fighters closing in as they realized what was happening. "They're too many," the gunner screamed. Brandon saw it, shadowy figures moving between rocks, lining up shots. If they hit the rotor hub... "We're not leaving without all of them," Brandon growled. "Load faster!" Another Marine stumbled into the helicopter. Then another. The engine sputtered again. Then the fuel line warning flashed red. "Sir, she's dying." Brandon's left hand tightened on the collective. He could feel it, the aircraft buckling beneath him, begging to be put out of its misery. But giving up wasn't an option. "Two more Marines," the crew chief shouted. Brandon glanced down. One Marine was dragging another who'd taken a hit to the leg. Enemy fighters emerged from behind the ridge, advancing fast. "We don't have time," the co-pilot yelled. Brandon unbuckled with one hand, leaning just enough to see the ground. The wounded Marine fell to his knees. "No," Brandon whispered. He made a choice, one he'd never forget. With a roar that defied the dying engines, Brandon pulled the helicopter sideways, rotor blades slicing terrifyingly close to the ridge, creating a wall of wind and dust that knocked the enemy back. "Go, go, go!" Brandon yelled through the headset. The last two Marines stumbled aboard. The crew chief slammed the door shut. "We're full." Brandon yanked the cyclic. The helicopter lurched upward. The engines screamed. The sticky fuel tried to choke them one last time. But somehow, some impossible physics-defying way, the Black Hawk lifted. Higher. Higher. For a moment, the bird hung in the air like a miracle suspended by sheer human will. Then the engine warning went dead. Then another. Then silence. "Brace," Brandon shouted. They glided. Not flew. Glided. Down the mountain, over the ravine, toward a clearing barely big enough for the skids to touch. The landing was brutal. A crunch, a skid. Sparks. But they lived. Every Marine on that helicopter lived. Brandon had passed out seconds after impact, still strapped into his seat, blood dripping from his side from shrapnel he hadn't even noticed. Back in the present, Colonel Mills' voice softened. "That was Sticky 6, he said. "That was the man you saw today carrying a mop, like it weighs more than a Black Hawk." The room was silent. Emotion swirled through Megan. Respect, sorrow, awe, guilt. A quiet hurricane. "He saved them all," she whispered. "He did," Mills said. "And he paid for it. But he never wanted medals. He never wanted spotlight. Just peace." Megan looked toward the mess hall door, the same door Brandon had walked out of earlier. She understood now. His silence wasn't weakness. His calm wasn't emptiness. His quiet wasn't retreat. It was survival. And for the first time since meeting him, Megan Drake felt something shift inside her. Something gentle. Something protective. Something she didn't have a name for yet. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Brandon Cross might have left the battlefield, but the fire in the sky had never left him. The afternoon sun spread across Miramar like warm honey, softening the harsh lines of aircraft hangars and concrete walls. The base, which just hours earlier had been filled with whispers about sticky six, now settled back into its usual rhythm boots on pavement, distant engine. Roars, clipped orders shouted across training yards. But inside the mess hall parking lot, one man walked slowly, purposefully, his steps, quieter than the world deserved. Brandon Cross pushed open the back door of the building, the one reserved for staff and deliveries. He needed air. He needed space. Mostly he needed a moment to put his thoughts back in order before the memories clawed too far into him. He leaned against the wall, head tilted back, eyes closed. Today had been too much. The call sign spoken aloud, the colonel recognizing him, the patch exposed, faces staring at him not with annoyance or indifference, but awe. He'd spent years building a small, quiet life, one where he was just another pair of hands cleaning up after people who had places to be and missions to serve. It wasn't glamorous, but it was gentle, predictable, safe. He inhaled, exhaled, then Daddy. The sound came bright and small like a sparkler bursting in the dark. Brandon opened his eyes just as a familiar little figure barreled toward him, brown ponytail bouncing tiny sneakers, slapping the pavement backpack, half open with crayons threatening to spill out. "Chloe," he murmured, and the weight on his chest loosened instantly. She collided into him, arms thrown around his waist with absolute trust. "I found you. Miss Tammy said you might still be here." She pulled back, her face scrunched in a mixture of determination and excitement. "You promised you'd pick me up early today. And guess what? I made you something." She dug into her backpack, pulling out a folded construction paper card that was more glue than paper. On the front, in crooked purple marker, was a drawing of a helicopter with stick figure Marines inside. Brandon stared at it. His breath faltered. "Chloe," he whispered. "What's this?" "That's you, Daddy," she said proudly. "I made it during art time. Miss Tammy said to draw something that makes us feel safe. So I drew you in your magic helicopter, the one you had when you were a hero." He froze, not visibly, but inside where memories throbbed like old wounds. Who told you about that?" he asked quietly. She shrugged. "You did. When I was littler. You said sometimes Daddy helped people. And I remember things." She tapped her temple. "My brain is very sticky," Brandon laughed despite himself. Weak but real. Chloe smiled wide, delighted she'd made him laugh. She tugged his hand. "Come on. I want to show you the flowers I planted outside my classroom. They're tiny babies now, but I think they'll grow faster if you look at them." He let her pull him along each small hand, tug, grounding him back to the present, away from burning mountains, failing engines, and dying friends. This, her tiny voice, her earnest joy, was why he'd survived. Why he'd walked away from everything else. Why he kept breathing on days when breathing hurt. As they rounded the corner, Chloe kept chattering her words, spilling out like a river that didn't know how to stop. "And then my teacher said I was good at coloring inside the lines, but I think coloring outside the lines is more fun, Daddy, because it makes things look like they're moving, you know?" And I told her, my daddy can fix anything. He slowed. "Anything." She nodded fiercely. "Yep. Even when stuff is really, really broken." She tilted her head. "You fixed me after Mommy went to heaven. Miss Tammy says that takes a special heart." His throat tightened. He scooped her up without warning, hugging her close. She squeaked in surprise, then giggled. From a short distance away, someone watched someone who had been trying for the last 5 minutes to find the right moment to approach, but couldn't quite get her feet to move. Captain Megan Drake stood near the corner of the building, arms crossed loosely, her expression softening as she watched father and daughter interact. She had meant to talk to Brandon again to apologize properly, not just stand stiffly as Colonel Mills talked around her earlier. But now seeing him with Chloe, seeing the way his entire being transformed in her presence, Megan felt something she hadn't prepared for. Respect was the first part of it. Guilt, too. But deeper still, something tender. Something that tugged at the edges of her guarded heart. She stepped forward cautiously. Brandon noticed her before Chloe did. His shoulders stiffened, not in anger, but in instinct. Megan raised a hand slowly. "I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to speak with you. If that's okay." Chloe turned eyes curious. "Hi, are you Daddy's friend?" Megan blinked, caught off guard. She glanced at Brandon. He gave a small nod. A small mercy. "Yes," Megan said. "I'd like to be." Chloe grinned. "Okay, I like your hair. It's like Miss Aria's, but more shiny." Megan smiled, genuine unguarded. "Thank you." Brandon cleared his throat gently. "Chloe, sweetheart, can you show Captain Drake your flowers?" "Oh, yes." Chloe grabbed Megan's hand without hesitation. "Come see. They're tiny, but they're trying their best." As the little girl tugged Megan along, the captain felt something unexpected swell within her, an ache, soft but profound. When Chloe bent to point at her tiny planted sprouts, Brandon approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "She's incredible," Megan whispered, careful not to interrupt Chloe's excited commentary. Brandon's gaze softened. "She's everything." There was a silence. Then not awkward, but meaningful. A silence that allowed truth to fill the air. Finally, Megan spoke. "Brandon. Earlier today, I said things I shouldn't have. I made assumptions. I was careless." He looked at her, the forgiveness already in his eyes even before she finished. "It's okay," he said softly. "No," she insisted gently. "It's not. But I'm trying to make it right." He gave a small, tired smile, one that felt like a bandage placed over a wound that had once bled heavily, but now only ached. "I know." Megan watched him, really watched him. His gentleness, his strength, the way he knelt beside Chloe as she explained her flowers again, the way his big hand dwarfed her small one. He wasn't just a legend. He wasn't just a ghost unit pilot. He wasn't even just a hero. He was a father. A quiet, steadfast father who chose a mop over medals because peace mattered more than glory. Something in Megan's chest shifted, not painfully, not suddenly, but undeniably. A beginning. As the wind rustled Chloe's hair and the sun dipped toward the horizon, Megan Drake realized this simple truth. A man like Brandon Cross didn't need the sky to burn to be extraordinary. Sometimes the bravest thing a hero could do was choose a quiet life and love one small person more than he had ever loved himself. Evening settled over Miramar, with the muted calm of a base exhaling after a long day. The sky shifted to soft golds and muted lavender shadows stretching across the concrete walkways as Marines headed back to barracks or late shifts. The training fields quieted. The motors wound down. The world softened. But inside Captain Megan Drake's chest, nothing felt soft. Not after watching Brandon Cross with his daughter. Not after hearing Colonel Mills describe that impossible night in Afghanistan. Not after replaying her own careless joke again and again, like a scene she desperately wished she could edit out of her own life. Respect had turned into guilt. And guilt had turned into something deeper, something unresolved, something that tugged at her until she could barely sit still. She needed to apologize. Properly. Privately. Not in the shadow of a crowd or under the weight of rank. So as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the base in fading amber light, Megan walked toward the maintenance wing, a quieter part of Miramar, where most Marines never bothered to go unless a pipe burst or a fuse blew. She found him just outside the supply shed. Brandon Cross stood beside an old utility cart, checking the contents of a toolbox. His posture was slightly hunched, as though trying to fold himself into something smaller, something less noticeable. His long hair loosened a few strands, escaping the tie. His shirt sleeves rolled past the elbows. The dying sunlight caught the faint angles of his face and softened them. He looked human. He looked tired. He looked nothing like the myth she now knew he was. For a moment, Megan simply watched him. She wasn't sure how long she stood there before she forced herself to speak. Brandon. His head lifted slightly enough to recognize her voice. He turned slowly, calm as ever. "Captain Drake," he said with a quiet nod. "Evening." His voice was steady, not cold, not distant, just restrained, as though he expected her to bring him a problem to fix, not a truth to unravel. Megan inhaled, steadying herself. "Do you have a minute?" He set down a wrench, wiping his hands on a rag. Sure. Her heart thudded once hard enough to surprise her. Earlier today, she began in the mess hall. "I said some things I shouldn't have. I treated you like someone I had figured out in 5 seconds. Someone I dismissed." She swallowed. "And I'm sorry." Brandon held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. No judgment. No anger. No pride wounded. Just the patient steadiness of a man who had lived through far worse than a captain's careless words. "You didn't know," he said simply. She shook her head. "That doesn't excuse it." He gave a faint smile, gentle, tired. "It does, actually. People make jokes. People misread each other. That's life." "But I wasn't just joking," Megan insisted softly. "I was." She exhaled slowly. "I was showing off, trying to sound clever in front of my team, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Brandon's expression shifted just slightly, enough for her to see the emotion beneath. Surprise, maybe, or a softness she hadn't earned yet. "Megan," he said quietly, dropping the formality without thinking. "I'm not angry." "I know," she whispered. "That's part of what makes this harder." He blinked, unsure how to respond to that. She stepped closer, not too close, just enough to make the moment personal instead of procedural. "You forgave me before I even apologized," Megan said. "And I'm grateful for that. Truly. But I still needed to tell you I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for more than just the joke." Brandon tilted his head. "More, I misjudged you," she said. "I saw a man with a mop and assumed I knew his whole story. I didn't look deeper. I didn't look at all." She swallowed, eyes flicking downward for a breath. "That's on me." Brandon let the silence settle between them. It wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind made of decisions, of things unsaid, of two lives touching edges for the first time. Finally, he spoke. "Megan, everyone carries something you can't see." His voice was low, almost a hum in the quiet evening. "You couldn't have known mine. Not unless I wanted you to." She lifted her eyes. "Would you ever have told me?" He hesitated, a long, careful pause. "No," he admitted. "Not unless I had to." Why not? His gaze drifted past her toward the dimming horizon. "Because I've spent years trying to be someone else. Someone quieter. Someone who can just raise his daughter and sweep floors and sleep at night without remembering." He trailed off the rest unspoken, and yet Megan felt it. All of it, in the stillness of his voice, in the heaviness of his sigh, in the scars she couldn't see. "But today happened," she said gently. "Yes," he murmured. "Today happened. And now everyone knows. He nodded. Probably. Stories travel fast in a place like this. A shadow of something sad, almost afraid, flickered across his eyes. Megan stepped closer, lowering her voice. We'll protect your quiet. I will protect your quiet. He met her gaze. For the first time, look collided with look. No walls, no fog, no distance. You don't owe me that, he said softly. Maybe not, she replied. But I want to. His breath caught. Maybe hers did too. Chloe's laughter echoed from somewhere across the courtyard, bright innocent. A reminder of the life Brandon had chosen, of the peace he was trying so desperately to keep. Brandon glanced toward the sound, the corners of his mouth softening. I should check on her. She gets restless when I'm out of sight too long. Megan nodded. Of course. But before he turned to leave, she said softly, Brandon, thank you. For what? For being kinder to me than I deserved. He hesitated only a moment before giving a small nod, one that held more emotion than she expected. Good night, Captain. Good night, Brandon. He walked away into the warm, gold-tinged twilight, moving with the same quiet strength she was beginning to recognize as the deepest kind of courage. Megan watched him go, an ache twisting unexpectedly in her chest. She had apologized. He had forgiven. But something else had shifted tonight. Something delicate. Something new. Something that felt like the faint beginning of healing on both sides. And Captain Megan Drake knew one truth with clarity. Brandon Cross wasn't simply a man she had misjudged. He was a man she wanted to understand. The next morning at Miramar carried the kind of crisp clarity only Southern California could offer. Blue skies, stretched wide, warm sunlight, resting over aircraft wings, and a breeze that hinted at ocean air drifting in from miles away. It was the kind of day that made the base look peaceful, almost idyllic. But peace rarely lasted long on a working Marine Corps installation, especially in the maintenance wing. Brandon Cross had just finished replacing a section of worn flooring near the storage lockers when he heard it, the unmistakable crack of something electrical shorting out. "Whoa, hey, back up!" a young Marine's voice rang out. Brandon dropped his tools and jogged toward the sound. As he rounded the corner of the mechanical bay, he found 3 Marines barely out of training, standing in a semicircle around a sparking electrical panel. Smoke curled upward in sharp gray puffs. One Marine waved a fire extinguisher with all the misplaced confidence of a man who had never used one. "Put that down," Brandon said immediately. The 3 froze. The one holding the extinguisher blinked. Sir, Janitor." "Put it down," Brandon repeated calmly. "Unless you want to blow that thing into a bigger mess." The extinguisher lowered slowly. Brandon stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the panel. The smell hit him. First. Burned wiring, overheated circuits. Something in the relay box had blown, likely taking the ground system with it. Who touched what he asked? The Marines exchanged anxious looks. Finally, one piped up. "We were, trying to fix a loose connection. The maintenance chief said we could try basic troubleshooting." Brandon arched an eyebrow. "Basic troubleshooting doesn't include opening a high-voltage relay without someone supervising." The Marine shrank like a scolded puppy. "We're sorry, sir. Mr. Brandon is fine." He crouched near the panel without touching it. "Did anyone get shocked?" "No, sir. We backed up quick. Good. Stay back." The Marines obeyed instantly. Something had changed in the last 24 hours. Word had traveled. Not loudly, not overtly, but like a current beneath the surface. That sticky 6. Don't mess with him. Treat him with respect. Brandon didn't want any of that. But here it was anyway. He grabbed a pair of insulated gloves from the tool bench, slid them on, and popped the outer casing open. Sparks jumped out and fizzed across his wrist. He didn't flinch. He'd faced worse things, louder, hotter, deadlier, falling from the sky in burning shards. He examined the wiring, carefully tracing the fault. "You overloaded it," he said with quiet certainty. "Probably crossed 2 lines when you tightened something that didn't need tightening." "Sorry," one Marine muttered, looking like he wanted to shrink into his boots. Instead of scolding, Brandon's tone softened. "Everyone screws up. But next time, don't open a live panel unless someone who knows electricity is standing beside you. Could have been bad." "Yes, sir," the Marine said again, then winced at his own words. Brandon tugged on the gloves. "Give me a few minutes. I'll stabilize it so the system doesn't cascade into the rest of the grid." The young Marines watched with rapt, almost reverent attention as Brandon worked. He rewired one section, reset a breaker, unclamped a compromised connector, and realigned the ground line. Within minutes, the panel hummed softly, steady, healthy. The Marines let out breath they'd been holding. "Holy crap," one whispered. "How'd you do that?" Brandon shrugged lightly. "Electricity behaves the same everywhere. Aircraft, housing grids, old barracks. They all follow the same principles. Did they make you fix this kind of stuff in the JSO?" another asked tentatively. Brandon paused for half a second. Not annoyed, just thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "Sometimes survival means fixing whatever's breaking faster than it can kill you." The Marine stood a little straighter. There was silence for a moment, respectful, not awkward. Finally, one gathered the courage to ask, "Sir, will you show us how to do it right?" Next time, Brandon met their eyes, steady, calm, fatherly in a way he didn't expect of himself. "Sure," he said. "But we start with basics. Safety first." They nodded enthusiastically. It was then that he felt another presence behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He sensed who it was by the energy, the slight shift in the atmosphere, the faint hit of vanilla shampoo carried on the breeze. Captain Megan Drake. She stepped forward, boots clicking softly on the concrete hands clasped behind her back. The young Marines noticed her and snapped to attention. "At ease," she said quietly. "I'm not here for inspection." Their shoulders relaxed just barely. Brandon finally turned. His expression remained neutral, gentle, guarded, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "You handled that well," Megan said, nodding toward the repaired panel. Brandon wiped his hands on a rag. "Just an electrical issue. You know that's not what I meant." She gestured toward the Marines. "The way you spoke to them, taught them, kept them calm." He shrugged. "Panicking never helps anybody." "Still," she said, voice gentle. "You stepped up." He didn't respond, so she stepped closer. "Brandon, leaders don't disappear just because they hang up their uniforms. Some things don't go away." He gazed at her thoughtfully. "You sound like Colonel Mills." "Maybe he's right," she replied softly. "Maybe you are still a leader, even when you're holding a wrench instead of a flight stick." The young Marines exchanged quiet glances, awed, respectful, and quietly retreated to give them space. Brandon folded the rag, carefully placing it on the cart. "I'm not trying to lead anything, Megan." "I know." She gave a small smile. "That's why you're good at it." He shook his head, embarrassed. "I'm just trying to keep this place from burning down." And that, she said, is exactly the kind of leader Marines trust. He looked down, exhaling a soft breath. Compliments seemed to sit strangely on him, like medals he no longer wished to wear. "Brandon," she added gently, "I saw what happened from outside the bay. You walked in there, and those Marines listened like you outranked the general. Do you know how rare that is?" He gave a faint, self-conscious smile. They were scared. "They were looking for someone steady," Megan corrected. "And that was you." He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He simply let the truth settle in the quiet air between them. Finally, she said, almost in a whisper, "You can make people better without even trying. You do realize that..." He looked away, the vulnerability of the moment pressing in on him. "I'm just trying to live quietly, I know," she said, "and I think you deserve that." Brandon glanced back at her and saw sincerity, warmth, and something else flickering just beneath. Something he wasn't ready to name, something she wasn't either. But the realization landed gently like a seed finding soil. Megan Drake didn't just respect him now. She admired him. Deeply. And for the first time in a long time, Brandon felt something shift inside him too, something unfamiliar. A small crisis had been avoided, but a much larger truth had come to light. Sometimes leadership wasn't loud. Sometimes it wasn't born from rank or orders. Sometimes it existed in the hands of a quiet man who had once guided a burning aircraft through the sky and now guided young Marines through fear with nothing more than patience and steadiness. A new respect blossomed that day, and with it, something even more unexpected hope. The next day unfolded slowly, like a page turning on its own. A soft breeze pushed through Miramar's main plaza, rustling the flags, carrying the distant scent of jet fuel and eucalyptus. Evening sunlight spilled across the concrete in deep amber bands, the kind that made everything look warmer, softer, almost cinematic. Captain Megan Drake stood outside the small base cafe, her fingers tapping lightly on the sleeve of her cup. She had been standing there for nearly 3 minutes, rehearsing what she wanted to say. No rank, no formality, no careful military walls, just two people having coffee. If he showed up. She had asked him earlier, mustering more courage than she cared to admit. "Brandon, would you like to grab a cup of coffee sometime? Maybe today, if you're free." He hadn't answered right away. He'd simply looked at her, thoughtful, hesitant, as if trying to decide whether this was a doorway he dared to step through. But then he'd said softly, "Sure," and that one word had settled strangely in her chest, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something she wasn't ready to name. Now she waited, heart thudding lightly in her ribcage. The door opened behind her. She turned reflexively, straightening her posture. Brandon Cross stood in the doorway holding an extra cup in his hand. Her breath caught. He looked different today, not dramatically, but noticeably. He'd gathered his hair neater than usual, pulled back into a tidier tie. His shirt was clean sleeves rolled up once, in a way that made him look effortlessly composed. His eyes quiet, thoughtful, found hers immediately. "Megan," he greeted softly. You came," she said, hating the tiny flutter in her voice. He lifted the cup. Chai latte for Chloe, but she fell asleep in the truck almost instantly. "I think art class wore her out." Megan smiled. "She's adorable." His expression warmed. "She is." They stepped aside so another Marine could enter the cafe, then moved toward an outdoor bench beneath a jacaranda tree. Purple blossoms scattered across the ground like soft confetti. Brandon sat on one end of the bench, Megan on the other, not far, but not intrusively close either. A respectful distance, a nervous one. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it might feel weird." "It doesn't," he said quietly. "Just unexpected." She nodded. "Unexpected for me, too." He looked down at his cup. "I'm not used to this." "What coffee?" He chuckled. "No, talking, opening up, being seen." Megan's chest tightened. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "You don't," he said quickly. "Actually, you're easy to talk to." It shouldn't have stunned her, but it did. "Really?" He glanced sideways almost shyly. "Yeah." A beat passed. Then Megan cleared her throat. I asked you here because I wanted to understand you better. Not the call sign. Not the legend. You." Brandon looked out toward the runway where 2 jets were taxiing for departure. His voice when he spoke was gentle but heavy. "There's not much to understand." "That's not true," she said softly. "There's a lot." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep everything locked inside. But something about her, the patience in her eyes, the genuine curiosity instead of hero worship, felt safe. "I left the service," he began slowly, "because I couldn't carry the weight anymore." Megan listened, posture relaxed, gaze steady. "I lost men," he continued. "Good men. Some died in my arms. Some because of decisions I made. Some because of decisions I couldn't make fast enough." His voice deepened, growing quieter. "That night in the mountains, they call it heroism. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like desperation. Like survival with 1,000 sharp edges." "And what happened after?" Megan asked gently. Brandon took a shaky breath. "After the crash, I woke up in a field hospital. They told me everyone I pulled out lived." He paused. "Then they told me 2 replacements sent to cover our exit didn't make it." His eyes glistened faintly, though he blinked the emotion away. "I couldn't breathe knowing the math of it," he murmured. 2 in exchange for 23. My head said it made sense. My heart said it wasn't fault." Megan leaned forward. "Brandon, that's not fair. You saved who you could. You saved more than anyone else could have." He didn't answer. She spoke again, softer, deeper. "Guilt doesn't tell the truth. It tells the story fear wants you to believe." He finally looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw the full weight behind his eyes. Not weakness, not fragility. Grief. Survivor's guilt. Years of self-imposed silence. "It's easier to sweep floors," he whispered. "Easier to fix broken stuff than broken memories." Megan's throat tightened. "Is that why you're here at Miramar? To stay close to what you used to love without having to face it?" Brandon exhaled through his nose, a bittersweet smile tugging his lips. "Maybe. That. And Chloe. She needs stability. A place where I can be home for her." Megan's expression softened in a way she didn't try to hide. "She's lucky to have you." "No," he corrected gently. "I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I get out of bed some mornings." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but deeply human. Then Megan spoke again. "You know, I thought I understood what strength looked like. I thought it meant toughness, unshakable confidence, power." "And now?" Brandon asked. She held his gaze. "Now I think strength looks a lot like you." His breath stilled. A muscle in his jaw shifted, uncertain whether to accept or deflect the compliment. "Megan," he said carefully, "you don't have to say things like that. I'm not saying it because I have to." Her voice lowered. "I'm saying it because it's true." Another silence. The sky above them had turned a dusky violet, the jacaranda blossoms shifting in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, Chloe's sleepy laugh echoed faintly from the truck. Brandon looked toward the sound, an instinctive gesture of a parent whose heart existed outside his own body. "She makes the world easier," he murmured. Megan smiled. "And you make her world safer." Something softened between them, then something warm, unspoken, delicate. A new understanding, a new respect, a small beginning. "Thank you," Brandon said suddenly, "for today, for listening." "And thank you," Megan replied, "for trusting me." He stood slowly, as if afraid to break the fragile peace between them. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked before she could stop herself. Brandon looked down at her, surprised, unsure, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'd like that." And as he walked away toward his daughter, Megan Drake knew she wasn't imagining the feeling blooming inside her chest. It wasn't admiration anymore. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even curiosity. It was the beginning of something that scared her in the gentlest possible way. Morning came softly to Miramar, draping the base in pale gold and cool shadows. The air smelled faintly of dew and jet fuel, familiar grounding. Brandon Cross arrived early, as always, the handle of his mop balanced in one hand, a thermos of lukewarm coffee in the other. But something in him felt lighter today, as if the dense fog of yesterday's confessions had lifted just enough for his eyes to see farther ahead. He didn't know what today would bring, but he knew something had shifted. In him, in Megan, in the base itself. And shifts, even the quiet ones, had a way of changing lives. Across the airfield, Captain Megan Drake walked briskly toward headquarters. Helmet tucked under her arm, hair pulled back with more care than usual. She had slept poorly, her mind replaying Brandon's words. His quiet grief, the softness in his voice when he spoke about Chloe. It wasn't romantic infatuation. Not yet. It was something deeper, slower, like a sunrise creeping over the horizon before the world noticed the light. When she reached the briefing room, Colonel Mills was already there, leaning over a table full of maintenance reports. "Captain," he said without looking up. "Sir." He tapped a clipboard before handing it to her. "We've had a vacancy open in the Advanced Aviation Training Program. I want you to consider helping with the new recruits." "Yes, sir." And Cross Mills added casually without lifting his gaze, "I want him on the advisory list." Megan froze. "Sir." Brandon. As in, instructing again. "Not flying," Mills said. "Not active duty. Observing. Offering insight. His experience is," his jaw clenched. "Irreplaceable." Megan hesitated. He might not want that. Mills finally looked up. "I know. That's why you're going to offer it." She blinked. "Me." "You're the only one he listens to," Mills said plainly. Her heart skipped. "Sir, I don't know about that." "I do," Mills replied. "And he trusts you." Then more gently, "Don't underestimate what a quiet man chooses when he begins to open his world again." Megan felt a warmth, small but steady, rise in her chest. She saluted and left the room, Colonel Mills watching her go with the faintest smile. A few hours later, Brandon was kneeling beside a broken water valve behind the commissary, sleeves rolled high, wrench in hand. A thin spray misted the air as he tightened the bolts. Footsteps approached. He didn't look up. "Captain," he said softly, recognizing the cadence before he saw her. Megan cleared her throat. "Morning. I brought you this." She held out a fresh cup of coffee, hot, steaming, exactly the kind he liked. Brandon raised an eyebrow. "You know my order?" She shrugged. "I watched you order it once, and I have a good memory." He took the cup with a gentle nod. "Thanks." They stood in a comfortable, almost tender silence. Finally, Megan spoke. "Colonel Mills wants to offer you something." Brandon stiffened instantly. "It's not a return to active service," she added quickly. "Nothing dangerous, nothing intense." He relaxed only slightly. "Then what is it?" "A role," she said, choosing her words carefully. "An advisory one, helping with aviation training. You wouldn't have to fly. Just guide, observe, share what you know." Brandon exhaled slowly, deeply. "I don't know," he said. Quietly. "You don't have to say yes," Megan replied. "But it's a chance to be around something you once loved. On your terms. No pressure. No rank." He looked down at his hands, scarred, steady, still capable of carrying a helicopter through a burning sky. "I left that world for a reason." "I know," Megan said softly. "And nobody wants to take your peace away." He looked up at her, really looked, and saw sincerity, warmth, and something deeper in her eyes. "You think I should do it?" he asked. She paused, thoughtful. "I think you should do whatever helps you breathe easier. Whatever makes life feel a little bigger, not smaller." His breath hitched, not visibly but internally. Her words touched something fragile inside him. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's enough," she replied gently. Later that afternoon, as Brandon finished his shift, Chloe bounded across the lawn toward him from the daycare building. Her backpack bounced wildly, her tiny sneakers barely hitting the grass before launching forward again. "Daddy, Daddy." He smiled, lifting her into his arms. "There you are, sunshine." "And there you are," she giggled. "Guess what? Miss Tammy says you can come to my class tomorrow and tell everyone about your job." Brandon froze. "You don't want me to talk about flying?" he said carefully. "No," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "You're not a flyer anymore. You fix things and help people." She tapped his nose. "That's cooler." Something melted inside him. She didn't see a hero from a classified unit. She didn't see a legend or a myth. She saw a father who made broken things whole. And maybe that was enough. He set her down softly. "Where's Captain Megan?" Chloe asked, looking around. Brandon's eyebrows raised. "Why, because she likes when you talk," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "She looks at you nice." Brandon nearly choked on air. "Chloe." "What?" she asked innocently. "She does." Before he could answer, a voice spoke behind him. "Smart kid." He turned. Megan stood there, hands tucked behind her back, sunlight warming her face. Chloe ran to her. "Captain Megan, Daddy said, maybe you'll drink coffee with him again." Brandon pinched the bridge of his nose. "Chloe." But Megan only smiled, soft, warm, genuine. "I'd like that," she said. Brandon's heart thudded. Chloe beamed. "Good. Because Daddy gets lonely sometimes," Chloe Brandon said in a tone that begged the heavens for mercy. Megan laughed, and the sound was unexpectedly beautiful. "It's okay," she said. "I get lonely sometimes, too." Brandon looked at her, then really deeply, and something settled quietly inside him. Acceptance, possibility, hope. Not the loud kind, the gentle kind, the healing kind, the kind that unfolds in quiet colors. As the day faded into evening, Colonel Mills watched from his office window. He saw Brandon standing beside Megan and Chloe, 3 silhouettes bathed in warm light. He nodded to himself. A man could be reborn in many ways. Some through fire, some through war, some through silence. But the rarest rebirth of all came through love, unexpected, unplanned, and unstoppable. On the walk toward the parking lot, Chloe slipped her hand into Megan's. "Will you drink coffee with Daddy tomorrow?" she asked. Megan bent down beside her. "If your dad wants me to." Chloe looked up at Brandon expectantly. He met Megan's eyes, steady, soft, and nodded. "I'd like that," he said quietly. Chloe squealed. "See, I told you both." And in that moment, in the soft glow of sunset, with Chloe's laughter filling the air and Megan's hand still lightly touching his, Brandon Cross realized something profound. Peace wasn't the absence of noise. It wasn't hiding from the world. It wasn't silence alone. Peace could also be found in gentle company, in shared coffee, in the laughter of a small girl, and in the warmth of someone who saw him. Not the legend, not the call sign, but the man. A new beginning had arrived. Quiet, steady, beautiful. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And which part of this story touched your heart the most? Your comments mean more to us than you know. They help us connect with you, and they guide us as we create more stories filled with hope and kindness. If this story brought you comfort, inspiration, or even just a quiet moment of reflection, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing these gentle, meaningful stories with the world. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We appreciate you, we value you, and we hope to see you again in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself, and may peace follow you wherever you go.